She's out with a new piece for the magazine entitled "Donald Trump Isn't Going Anywhere." And in the new piece, Molly writes in part, quote, "If there is one fantasy we in American political life are the most guilty of, it's the delusion that Donald Trump will simply go away. I remember the first time someone suggested to me that Trump would magically disappear. It was shortly after the election that he was surely going to lose. You remember the 2016 election, right? Well, a New York friend who knew Trump told me he would hate being president. He would hate D.C. with its lack of glamour and, yes, golf. 4 years later, after Trump decisively lost the presidential election to Joe Biden, an anonymous senior Republican official was still in Fantasyland, infamously telling the Washington Post, "What is the downside for humoring him for this little bit of time? It's not like he's plotting how to prevent Joe Biden from taking power on January 20th. In fact, plotting was exactly what Trump was doing." Non-MAGA Republicans could have killed off any chance of a Trump political comeback by impeaching him for inciting the insurrection. But of course, they let him off the hook, perhaps thinking he'd vanish in Mar-a-Lago. So there is no wishing Trump away. Joe Biden must beat him again like he did in 2020. And even then, we have to pray that Trump will finally abstain from political life and slink quietly off to golf in Palm Beach for the rest of his days. I actually doubt even that, Molly. This is what we were talking about just about an hour ago. Like, why these Republican senators not even going to deal with the House? But some of them are pretty elder statesmen in the party. Why they can't take him on? I mean, it's not like there isn't a long list of things that might connect with even MAGA Republicans as wrong.
Yeah, and he's humiliated a lot of these people. That's the other thing. But you see them all falling in line. And I think that they're still scared, right? Mitt Romney spent so much money on private security. And I think that these senators don't want to face him. They don't want to get the scary death threats. They don't want to be swatted, right? We saw that. And so they back down and they just hope he'll go away. And this has really been their position since 2015, that if you ignore him, he'll go away. And in fact, that is not a successful way to rid yourself of a president.
Well, Adrienne Elrod, to an extent, easier and harder for Democrats supporting Joe Biden. It's almost like they have to do the Republicans' jobs for them. Any Republican serving in Congress or in the RNC trying to elect a Republican leader, they're not doing their job if they are supporting a four-time indicted, multi-lawsuit plagued former president who tried to steal the election and incited an insurrection.
Yeah, I mean, Mika, you'll recall back in 2016 when it became apparent that Donald Trump was going to be, very quickly apparent, I might add, that he was going to be the Republican nominee in the primary, in the presidential primary. He would be the general election nominee. And right around that time, you could see a lot of Republicans who had been criticizing him. Who is this guy? He shouldn't be our nominee. Why is he, doing so well in some of these early states? Like, what is going on here? He's not one of us. Slowly started to embrace him. And I remember being on Hillary Clinton's campaign, having a conversation with Jennifer Palmieri, who was on the show earlier, and saying at some point this is going to come back to bite them. At some point, these Republicans are not going to know what to do with themselves when they've embraced Trump so aggressively early on. And that is all what's happening now. And we're seeing this play out in real time where a MAGA-backed opponent in a primary wins, and then that person cannot win the general election. So, I wish we had more Mitt Romneys out there who were speaking out and pushing back. But the reality is the Republican Party today has embraced Trump. They have embraced MAGA extremism. There are a few outliers, of course. But this is the Republican Party today, and they're the ones who are going to have to figure out how to move forward as a party embracing somebody like Donald Trump.
So, Eddie, Molly makes a good point. There was a moment where Republicans could have broken from Trump. After January 6th, that second impeachment trial, had Mitch McConnell whipped enough senators to vote to convict, Trump would be forbidden from holding office again. That didn't happen. Seems to me there was another, though, right after the 2022 midterms, where Trump was really at the low water mark and a lot of his candidates lost. those who wanted to challenge him for the Republican nomination sort of left him alone. They didn't go after him. And yes, we have seen in recent months, particularly post-indictments, attacking Trump has not worked out for these candidates. We can ask Chris Christie about that. But wasn't there a moment where he was vulnerable? Wasn't there a moment where Republicans could have turned the page? And had they showed the guts right then to go after him, maybe we have a different primary race right now?
Perhaps. But, you know, the reality of the matter is that they accepted the view that the only way they could win nationally is that they had to turn out those voters, those white voters, who had traditionally not participated in the political process. Whenever Trump is on the ballot, at least that's the story, they turn out in droves, right? And so the strategy was, this is what we have to do. We have to, in some ways, stoke grievance. We have to stoke fear in order to turn out those folks who wouldn't ordinarily turn out. But I think there's another point here about this, the issue that you bring up, Molly. And that is the legitimation crisis that Trump has caused, right? So even if he loses, he gets killed at the ballot, will 20% of his voters believe that he actually won, that he actually lost, that Biden won? So there is a deep sense of distrust, a lack of confidence in the administrative function of our electoral process. And so we're going to face that in 2024. Yeah. Will people view the outcome, if he doesn't win, as legitimate? And that's a big question we have to confront.
On the Trump's thing, who he is. What about this theory that his opponents, the culture, the media, we've always sort of not gotten to the core of who he really is. He is like a gang leader or a highly skilled criminal who has practiced over and over how not to get caught at the theft that he's continually pulling off, the theft of democracy. And the people in his gang, he's turned them into cowards out of fear of their leader. There's nothing more complex than that, I think, in part of this as we look at Donald Trump.
It does seem like people are addicted to not holding him responsible for the things he does, right? Like they constantly, like those 2 impeachments, we're constantly seeing sort of him get special treatment.
But why do you think they're so afraid of him?
Right.
Why?
Yeah. And they are beholden to his voters. I mean, and they fear that if they go after Trump, they'd lose those voters, Joe Mika. And again, it's too late now. I think there was a moment of vulnerability where they could have gone after Trump. That ship has sailed. We'll see what kind of attacks Nikki Haley and to a lesser extent Ron DeSantis launched in the days before New Hampshire. But it feels like a last stand, and frankly, the clock is rapidly ticking.
I think they've demeaned themselves, and I think they've hurt their own campaigns by saying things like, I don't kick sideways at a man who steals nuclear documents. I don't kick sideways at a man who started an insurrection. I don't kick sideways at a man who says he grabs women by the you-know-what. I don't kick sideways against a man who takes dirt on a political rival from a foreign leader and takes millions and millions of dollars from foreign companies to his personal benefit while he's president. You don't kick sideways? Why don't you punch that in the nose? Because otherwise you don't have any credibility.
Well,
you're not going after it.
But you know, Adrienne, the fact is these politicians are simply reflecting the overwhelming majority of Republicans that put them in office in primaries.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I'm not even going to really go there, but there was a line that I guess I will go there that Hillary Clinton got in trouble for in 2016 when she used the term deplorable. But that is kind of where we are, right? And I think it's now coming to we're seeing the fact that there are a lot of folks out there in America who this is what they believe in, this is what they want. And you certainly see that in the Republican Party, where you have you do have some Republicans out there who I think are still very much struggling to find a home. You know, is there a moderate Republican left that I can vote for? And sometimes you do see those Republicans in primaries, but they almost always lose to the MAGA extremists if they are running against a MAGA Republican. And then that person oftentimes, especially in swing districts, more often than not loses in the general election. So it's something the Republican Party is going to have to grapple with. Again, I remember in 2016 knowing that someday this was going to all come back around and the Republicans were going to have a really hard time trying to figure out how to move forward as a party while they embrace this MAGA movement. And here we're seeing this, you know, play out in real time now.